Here we go. Good morning. Welcome back to the Believe, Be Real, Be Bold podcast. My name is Dave Glazer. I am so excited to invite my next guest on, Mr. Nick Mancini. He and I have known each other for a while now. We met through a group that we're both a part of. Nick is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Nick, if you could tell us a little bit about how and why you got started in this field, I would greatly appreciate that.
Thanks. Good morning, Dave.
Morning.
So I got into this field right after undergraduate. I did a service program out here, and it helped me get connected with providing services to marginalized populations and serving those who have struggled with chronic mental health issues. And from there, I wanted to learn a lot more about how people relate to each other and what the healing process looks like. And so after working in that field for a little bit in the nonprofit world, I decided to go back, get my master's degree, and learn a little bit more about counseling skills, and then particularly the marriage and family therapy license. That is just a different perspective where it looks at it more systemically, and it looks at how all of these different relationships are impacting and influencing how we live our life and relate to others. And that seemed to really align for me, and mostly because I've been really fortunate to be a part of a lot of different communities growing up. And so as I've reflected on my career, I've really wanted to shape my work around community and building community and connections that way.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's a really good explanation, a quick synopsis of what you do. And who is it that seeks out your help, and who do you find coming to you most frequently?
It kind of goes in waves sometimes. And I think that in the field, they often ask, like, oh, what's your niche? And I don't really like to say, like, oh, this is the one diagnosis that I work with or the one issue that I handle. I think that when someone calls me, I usually chat with them for about 30 minutes and do a little screening and say, hey, this is who I am. This is my approach. Is that a good fit for you and what you're looking for? And so it oftentimes is the relationship that we have going to be a good fit that will foster the most growth and development towards like the life that they want to live. And so recently I've had people who are in their mid-20s to early 30s who are struggling with life transitions, getting established in their career, relationships, and building a friendship community. And then I've also had some older adults as well who are in a similar phase of life, just at a different time.
Is that the midlife crisis arena when you find that older population coming to you?
Yes, sometimes it is. I mean, a lot of it is like, either they've experienced some divorce and then they're trying to get back into an intimate relationship. And so they're trying to figure out how to reestablish themselves, or maybe there's a significant job change and that really threw them off. And so they're wanting to kind of say, like, what's my identity? Who am I? I've been doing this for this many years. And now what's the next step for me?
Awesome. I love the word that you used earlier, your systematic approach to working with an individual. So you have a 30-minute phone consultation as an intake, building a relationship, understanding if this person is the right fit for you and vice versa. And then what happens after that in the system of counseling that you're performing?
Sure. So we meet for an initial session, and usually that initial session includes just rapport building and getting to know each other, kind of going over their health history, going over in a little bit of a deeper way what their main issues or things that they were struggling with, brought them into our session, and then talking about some different goals. The systemic part of it is asking, hey, who else is involved in this? And who else is in your life that is supportive? Who else might be a support for you? And what are these different groups that you're a part of or communities that are influencing how you are? So work, family, friend groups, these are different systems that are at play in how we view the world and engage in it.
That's awesome. In my experience as a business owner, I have to take an approach of like disassociating my own success and failure from my business. So as business owners, we wear a lot of different hats, and at work, I'm one guy, and then I need to come home and I need to switch gears and become a leader in a different community. So do you find that in your own world, in your own life?
Well, I used to do that, Dave, and it came to bite me in the butt one year where I was trying to kind of compartmentalize too many things, and I found that it didn't really work for me that well, because I think that it's all integrated. And so I have to acknowledge that sometimes work is going to influence personal life, sometimes personal life is going to impact my work. And so I've really had to work hard to say, okay, it's all one. And so I think as a business owner as well, I get excited, I get passionate, and want the best for my clients, but also want the best for my business. And I think it's really hard to separate that, because in many ways, the business is the livelihood, and the livelihood helps shape the business. If I'm not taking care of myself outside of work, then it's hard for me to show up and be present to people.
On both ends of the spectrum too. Like if we're burnt out from work, then it's hard to show up and be present at home.
Yes.
You have a small family,
Right.
and I can understand coming back to this compartmentalizing. I can't do it either. It's so hard for me to compartmentalize work and life, because the purpose that we carry, and we talked about this the other day, the purpose that we carry is ingrained in both our personal life and our professional life. Do you find that? Can you relate to that?
Yes, it's and with some of my colleagues, we talk about what is our mission. Individual mission. What is the mission of our organization, of our business? How do we encourage other people to find what their mission is?
Good. Do you find a lot of people coming to you without a purpose, or with a purpose, and then they just don't know how to level up or get the most out of their life?
Yes, and I find people come to me who have a desire and have a mission, and it's just hard to get to that next step of implementation.
And you're a guide or a facilitator to help them implement their purpose and their passion into their world.
Yes, I think as a therapist, we have multiple roles as well. Sometimes it's a coach, sometimes for me it's a cheerleader, and then there's other times when it's an accountability buddy, and so there's these different roles that therapists kind of take on, because this is an intimate relationship, and it's also kind of an awkward relationship too. It's kind of a weird feel. People come in and talk to me, and they've never met me before. It's the first time, and I am always so grateful to my clients. And I said, hey, thank you for coming in today. I appreciate it. And thank you for going into the process of building trust and learning about building a healthy relationship. I think there's a parallel process to the work that I do, and then what they can do outside of my walls. Because I often tell my clients, I'm like, look, I don't know if what you're telling me is true. You could be making up the entire story. because I only see you in a very specific setting. And so I am just responding to what's important to you. And so I'm going to work with that. And I hope that what we talk about can help facilitate some deeper connection outside of here. And so the process of us building a relationship in a healthy way that is also authentic and intimate, I hope that's something that you're learning and getting skills for bringing it out into your community.
So eventually somebody's going to graduate from one level to the next when working with you. And you said a key word in there, and I love it: authentic, honest. And there's so much vulnerability when it comes to this intimate relationship that you're building. And in our world, we're working on duplication of healthy habits so that our clients can graduate to doing it more so on their own. Do you find the same in your business and your relationship with your clients?
Yes, and I think one of the ways that, and this is maybe my own style or approach, is that I really like to foster curiosity. I ask a lot of questions, and I wonder about what they're into, what their world looks like, and I hope that they begin to get curious about their life, so they ask questions to bring awareness and insight to what it is that they're doing. Sometimes in my work, I think that I really want to simplify and say, hey, you already have the skills, because this is what I've heard you say. You've done this, you've done this, you've done this. Now let's connect it to something that is a value of yours, that's important, that brings you more meaning and purpose. And so let's just make a little bit of a shift there to bring some attention and intentionality to the things that you're already doing, and just kind of beef it up with some values and some positive talk around that. So you have the awareness and you have the insight, and it is meaningful for you.
That's awesome. I respect that so much, and it makes so much sense to me. So let's say that somebody comes to you and they're recently out of a relationship, whether that's a breakup or a divorce. Where do you begin helping them become self-aware and begin this process as a journey?
That's a great question, because I think each person that comes in starts at a different place, depending on how the relationship ended or where they're at and what happened. And I think that in many instances, it's a shift of kind of meeting them where they are in that process. Are they ready to go and talk about dating right away? Sometimes some people are. They're like, I just need to get out there and try it out and kind of learn by doing. Other people want to slow down the process, and they might have a lot of feelings of shame, embarrassment, anger, where they need to kind of slow down and see how this shift in their life and their relationships is impacting them. Because like we talked about earlier, that's integrated, it'll show up in other areas of your life.
That's so absolutely true. So your counsel or your coaching or your facilitation for this process is meet them where they're at. I love that expression. Meet them where they're at. If somebody is working through feelings of shame, anger, and embarrassment, it's good advice to slow them down. And is there homework that they can do? Is there material that they can read to help them work through that process outside of that short period of time that you get to work with them each week?
There's a few books that I like to recommend, and they tend to be more existential in their reading, and so to kind of foster that curiosity, and so like The Alchemist, Man's Search for Meaning, and then another book that is written by somebody who's done a lot of research on vulnerability and authenticity is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. She's really brought the conversation about how we connect with each other mainstream, and it's been really meaningful and helpful. And then as far as like homework, there's a few activities that I do. I think that one activity that I do with my clients is I have a stack of a bunch of values cards, and we just we go through this process where we sort through all the values cards and kind of get eventually like 7 cards that kind of represent the broad character, and then sort down from there to identify some of the main ones. And what I like about the process is that you eventually get down to 3 and then 1. And then in the 3, it says, what are your top 3 values? And if they're in balance, you're in balance. If they're out of balance, you're out of balance. And then you pick out of the 7 that you get to, the last one is to pick your top value. And this is something that you would be willing to die for or live in service of. And I really like that question because I don't know how often people are asked, what are you willing to live in service of for your life? And so some of the homework that I would give in my sessions is just pay attention to what you do each day. What are the themes of your life? There's probably a handful of themes, and from those themes, can you start to recognize that you're living in service of a mission, of a purpose?
That's a strong message, and I'm all on board with that so much. So let's say that this particular client has come to you, they've done a little bit of work, they are reading Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. I love that recommendation. It's the second time this week I've heard it, and I'm looking for a new Audible book. So that might be tops of my list of recommended books this week. So thank you. Let's say this person has worked on shame, anger, and embarrassment, and they're ready to begin dating again. How does this person show up authentically when they start that process?
Yeah, big question. And it's really interesting because of how dating seems to be working these days. So there's an app for just meeting up. There's an app for dating. There's apps for hooking up. There's the online presence is really influential and strong. And so some of my clients have really struggled with that. They're going on all these apps and they'll be like, I haven't gotten one match or something like that. And so it's a different scene than I think when I probably was. I've been married for 4 years, and we've been together for 10. This fall will be 10 years, and so I'm kind of out of the dating game. But I think about like where have been like the most meaningful connections that I've made, and I continue to come back to shared experiences. And so I tell clients like, okay, we've done all these values exercises. We've talked about this. We've evaluated and reviewed what you do each week, each day, and kind of defined some of your purpose and what you're into. Where are some organizations that maybe you could volunteer? Where can maybe there's a group that you can meet with. And I know that sometimes my personality, I'd be like, yeah, I'll sign up for that. I'll sign up for this. I'll sign up for this. But then there's other people that I meet with who might tend to be a little bit more introverted, and it's a little bit harder for them to just say yes. And so being very selective about, hey, it's honor your process too. It's not necessarily about quantity, it's about quality. And so find some shared activities that will allow you to align with people who will have similar values. And then hopefully that network will grow. And so I tend to just really push for what are some activities, what's one or two groups or communities that you can be a part of, and expand from there. Because I think as humans, that's how we connect and bond too. And I imagine that's some of the stuff that you do in your work as well. You know, when you're training people, if they're just doing it by themselves, they might make some gains. But when they have another partner, or they're in a group with a small group in a class and they're exercising, they might be able to push over like some of the limitations that they typically have had.
Yeah, it's definitely proven that when working out in a small group setting or a large group setting, our clients burn more calories and reach their goals quicker and maybe more enthusiastically. I mean, we'll talk about enthusiasm here in a second, because I get enthusiastic as well. So true. Yeah. What community can we become involved in that is in alignment with our purpose, so that we can meet like-minded individuals? And we brought up apps, and we're talking about online and the scene. It's different now. It's changed. The process of meeting people is a lot different than, say, 10 years ago when you were dating your wife, and then 8 years ago when I began a couple of long-term relationships. You know, for the past year, I've been experiencing what you're talking about. Being a busy business owner, looking for a new authentic community to become a part of, so that I can meet like-minded individuals. And that has been the hardest part for me. What makes it easier is that I've found my purpose in that time frame. And when I begin to talk about that purpose, the people who care about what I care about gravitate to me. Does that make sense?
It does. And as you were talking, that's what I was thinking about, is I think that it's easy to say like, hey, I'm meeting you today and this is who I am right now. However, there's many years of experiences and relationships that have shaped how I am presenting today. And so being able to have those conversations with people and feel confident about your story, to then say, this is my story. And if people are on board, great. Maybe then you engage in a little bit deeper conversation. If they're not feeling your story, being able to say, okay, I like my story. I'm good with my story. This person's not feeling it. It's why force something that's not going to happen right now.
Amen to that. Absolutely. And when we're telling that story, I like to foster curiosity. So I keep that first little story brief, to kind of test the waters, make sure that this person is actually deserving of my vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I've learned in my process of like identifying who it is that has earned the right to learn that next deeper level of the story. We can't just share it all out in the first day.
In the counseling world, we talk about boundaries, and that's just healthy boundaries. So okay. Well done.
It's a learning process, you know. Nobody's going to be perfect at that, especially at boundaries, setting boundaries.
And the learning process is challenging. I think about, you know, if I were to go back to school today, I've been out for 5 years, it would take me a while to learn about like, oh, I have to get a routine, I have to do homework, I have to type, like, is there different formatting now and all these different things. And so it is a learning. It comes down to learning. And so learning about yourself in the environment, learning about others and how they're engaging, and showing some grace in that learning process. Because at the end of the day, like, I don't know. And I tell my clients, like, I don't know. Like, go give it a try. Like, I could tell you some of these things that I hope and wish for. And yeah, sometimes it's trial and error, and it's experimenting.
Of course.
And that's a scary thing for people to hear sometimes, because uncertainty, ambiguity elicits some feelings that are uncomfortable. And so being okay with some of that unknown allows people to then maybe be a little bit more present to like their curiosity and learning, and pay attention to what they're engaging in versus maybe some of the stuff that's kind of continuing to circle around in their head.
Mm-hmm. One thing that you said in there, thank you so very much. That was a clear explanation, way clearer than I could ever put it. But that process of learning what we need to become involved in a new community, like I love to give that facilitator's advice of, let's learn about us first so that we can clearly define our values and our purpose and our mission moving forward. And then we can have the opportunity to find somebody join us on that mission to enrich our lives once we have determined the path. And that might be the next step in the process that we've been talking about so far, is like, okay, let's get over the breakup, let's get over the divorce, and then let's identify who we are, what our mission is, what our purpose is, our values, and then find that community. So where I'm going with this is that community piece of identifying like-minded people. And when we are showing up as a new member of a community, how do we identify authenticity in somebody else?
I think that, again, like it takes some time, and I think it also that's where it goes back to like those boundaries, and hopefully modeling some of the process that we've gone into, where it's like, hey, we just met, we're building a relationship, here's the level of conversation. And then, there's everybody has probably a few things that are like trust builders for them. And then everybody has a few things that are deal breakers for them as well. And so understanding what's the deal breaker. If somebody's maybe says something and it's like, whoa, this seems like it's going down like the road that is, I've been before, that's not healthy for me. Again, approach that from curiosity, because do you immediately write them off? Sometimes not. I think it's having choice and feeling that you are in control and have power to be able to respond to people. And I think that sometimes people go into these situations and they want the connection, and they're like, boom, here I am, here's all of this. And that can be really overwhelming for somebody to receive, and could lead to like maybe some distance or someone taking advantage of them. And so go in a little bit slow and kind of know what your levels are, what's important to you to share enough of the story. I think you had a really good example of what that is when you were talking about yourself, where you're like, yeah, here's something that is like an icebreaker, essentially, to just kind of ease into it. And you kind of gauge how they respond. I think there's also paying attention to like the natural engagement that you have with them, and paying attention to the nonverbals. Sometimes we get stuck on the verbal communication so much that that content really clouds like a lot of other communication that's happening. What are people's nonverbals? Are they looking you in their eye? Are they smiling? Are they attentive? Or are they distracted all the time and not really paying attention? I think there's so much nonverbal communication that happens that paying attention to that and how that is impacting you and making you feel can give you a lot of information on whether or not you kind of continue with the deep conversations or not.
That's awesome advice, Nick. Thank you very much. I'm like going through the process of the last year. I'm like, all right, when did I okay? How did I okay? All right, I'm going through my checklist here mentally. I've been investigating the levels of intimacy, and we talked about levels of conversation, and that's where we're going to jump to. I don't want to race through the first level of intimacy of building that relationship of like starting with an icebreaker, and then how much small talk, how much deep talk do we take in the first few days or weeks, or identifying if that person has earned our vulnerability yet. And I know that there's a question around that process, but how do we stay most present in these levels of creating a relationship, creating trust and intimacy in a new relationship?
So one of the things I was thinking about as you were chatting about like the levels of intimacy and engaging in that process is that there's inherent risk involved in this process. And so it's a risky situation. And so how comfortable are you with engaging in that risk level, and what's your risk tolerance? And then I think that can inform the depths of the vulnerability and the conversations that you have and the engagement that you're having. Because some people might be super risky because they're confident in their story, they know their values, and they're ready. And so they might go in real hard, real fast, and be like, here I am. And they can do that. And if people are like, whoa, get out, like it doesn't necessarily impact them that much because they've done a lot of work to be able to tolerate that risk, and they know where they are. They have that confidence, they have that self-esteem to be able to engage in that. Other people may be more timid or maybe more insecure still about where they're at, and that's okay. So then they're going to go in a little bit slower because the risk level, even on that first intimacy, feels like it might be at the deeper one.
That's a phenomenal perspective, and I'm kind of combining that perspective in with boundaries and our personalities and how enthusiastic we can come across. I'm so enthusiastic about my life's purpose and my mission right now. I haven't always been that way. I was always a little bit hiding behind the business of personal training, as opposed to being in the forefront of like, this is why I'm a personal trainer. And once I determined that mission and that purpose, and identifying the fact that I wanted somebody on this journey with me, that helped me gain the confidence. It helped me pursue self-awareness so that I could be my most authentic self when I do come across that person who wants to join me on the journey. So what else can you add to boundaries, levels of intimacy, and maybe fear of rejection or feelings of burden on somebody else? I know that those are two different things, but they're related as well.
Sure. One thing that I would add to kind of the theme of our conversation right now, and having conversation, engaging with people and having conversations, and this is something personally that I have to work on quite a bit, and I've gotten feedback from mentors, supervisors, colleagues, my wife, friends, and And it's the idea of intention versus impact. And so what are my intentions? And when I'm engaging in activities or in conversation, and am I aware of what the impact will be on how I am engaging in all that stuff? And is that going to be congruent? Because I think that sometimes my passion or excitement, enthusiasm, I've learned can sometimes come across as intimidating or threatening to people. And in my mind, I was just in the zone and I'm like, yeah, I'm excited, I'm doing this. And so it's always like multiple way relationships and also like being able to build in like that empathy towards others to say, okay, what is the impact? What is the message that I'm sharing that I want them to receive? Because sometimes I might say something and be like, what are you doing? And people maybe the walls go up and they're like, dude, you need to chill out. Like, and I think that's me sometimes losing the awareness of like what the impact is. And so when you're going into these relationships, dynamics, what's the other person need and want too? And how are we going to be able to communicate so that the impact can net a positive interaction?
I'm digesting that. That's a bigger concept than I had stepped into before. Becoming self-aware. Oftentimes I've had to have been aware of other people so that it's not always centered on me and my journey. And I think that's a key component is when I go out and I'm seeking the other person to enrich my life and my journey and my mission and my purpose, is paying attention to how am I enriching their life as well. It can't all just be me, go, my self-awareness, my journey, my authenticity, my vulnerability. Let me be gracious. Let me have grace for that other person on their journey too.
How do you foster and honor their authenticity? Yeah, I think that's like next level stuff. When you're talking about levels, I think once you have a good idea of where you're at, well, then when you're engaging, like how do you engage in a relationship where you can say like, hey, here I am, this is who I am, and I want to know who you are, and I'm able to hold the space for you to be who you are, and we can engage in that way.
That's so healthy. In
theory, I think in practice it's messy. In practice, it's uncomfortable, and in practice, we don't always know what the outcome is going to be. And so the questions that you're asking are great questions. And I think that I would encourage you to kind of approach these questions from a place of like, they are questions that help assess and reflect. They're not questions that lead to direct outcomes. Because I think part of also being authentic and being in relationships is recognizing that everybody is constantly growing and developing and having new experiences, and we're being influenced by that, so we're changing. And so we have to be willing to also grow with each other, whoever we're in relationship with. And I think that's a challenging area too. And that's something that, I've talked with some of my clients about, especially some people in their mid-20s to early 30s. They're like, I'm growing on this track, but my friends and my peer group are kind of still here. And it's hard for me to negotiate that difference. And so constant evaluation, I think sometimes that can be overwhelming. I don't share that to be like, oh my gosh, you have to be thinking about this all the time, 24/7. However, I do joke with some people where I'm like, I wish that everybody went and got their master's degree in counseling, because I think then people would just, my hope would be that communication would be better, and people would have gone through a process of self-reflection to be able to kind of understand some of these like core tenets of being human.
Dude, that's awesome, Nick. I appreciate that that next level stuff that we just kind of fell into. I hadn't anticipated reaching that far. How best can somebody get a hold of you if they want a little bit more information and maybe a little bit more out of this conversation with you?
Sure, they can call me directly. They can email me. They can visit my website. It's www.liftcoloradocounseling.com. And then my direct phone number is 720-663-1465. And I am available evenings, weekends, during the day. I'm excited to have these conversations. I'm grateful to be able to engage with you in this type of conversation too, because this brings meaningful work and connection and collaboration, because I think that community is one of my top values. And so building a community of support allows people to then have access to resources. And I think sometimes people are often, well, not often, I would say that like sometimes when people call me initially, I just am like, hey, thank you for calling me. Like that first phone call is often the hardest one to reach out and say like, hey, there's some things going on and I want to talk to somebody about this. And boom, there's the courage. Mm-hmm. There's the beginning of authenticity from that first phone call, from that first interaction. Like that's powerful stuff to be able to say, hey, I need some help. And I think that our culture is slowly moving into it being okay to ask for help. And I'd like to kind of continue to advocate for that, because we can't do this alone. And so really working hard to build that community and have resources and create accessibility to really cool people doing awesome things.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was awesome. What's up next for your growing community? Where's the destination in the next 6 to 12 months?
So I have an office in Cherry Creek, and currently I have 3 offices, and I collaborate with 2 other clinicians, and I have an intern. And so we're trying to build a little bit of a collective so that people have a lot of different options, because I'm not always the best therapist for everybody. And I recognize that, and that's me being authentic and being like honoring just my style. And so like building some different resources so people can engage in different ways and make sure that they find somebody that allows them to connect. And so we're in this process right now of really building a community of support.
That's incredible, Nick. Thank you so very much. Again, I appreciate your time. It's early, and you brought down the house with our levels of conversation, and I really respect that. Appreciate it from you. And what do you say we reconnect in about 6 to 12 months and we find out where and how far along on this journey we've come?
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you too. Thank you for what you do. It's awesome.
I appreciate that, Nick. Thank you very much. We'll jump on the podcast again in about 6 to 12 months and we'll catch up. But thank you so very much, Nick. And I wanted to invite our listeners, if Nick's message resonates with you, please reach out to him via his website. I noticed that his number and email address are both listed on the website. I'll put them in the show notes below. Again, thanks for tuning into the podcast today. I hope you got a ton of value out of our conversation, and I'll talk to you next week.